Okay, I'm here to tell everyone that it is still possible to find a 60-year-old iconic album in near mint condition in the stacks, out in the wild, sitting there in broad daylight. Last week, I found a near mint example of Dylan's Bringing It All Back Home, 1965. Recorded over 3 days, January 1965. Yes, that is over 60 years ago. This is actually the 1C Matrix Santa Maria pressing. Look at the preservation on this record. It was sitting in the Bob Dylan bin at a national chain store here in Fort Collins. Maybe it's a regional chain. Crisp corners, very nice spine. I did use a little natural household cleaner on a couple paper towels and applied that very carefully to this cover, and just look at how crisp and clean this thing is. Now I want to compare this to, I happen to have the 1A Pittman mono pressing. I found this at Driver 8 Records in Fort Collins about a year ago now, maybe even a touch longer than a year ago. Charles had picked up a collection, and you'll see some kind of differences here. First of all, I did the same treatment with the natural cleaner. I'm a little worried about chemicals, too many chemicals on these, cardboard covers, and it cleaned up pretty well, but it is not as crisp and clean as this stereo pressing. And this is really a good example here, a good opportunity to show how the graphic design was laid out, where you've got the stereo at the top. Of course, no stereo for that mono pressing. And then if we look at the back, how they laid this out, you can see on the stereo pressing, there's a horizontal line there, and that's gone away. It's kind of the cut line on the mono pressing. Now, I know this stereo pressing is a very early pressing, because if you look at the label, you can see there at the bottom of the label, stereo and 360 sound. Those are in black ink. Later pressings, that moved to a white ink. And, while I have this here, this has to be seen and heard to be believed. A very, very trace amount of surface noise in the lead-in groove on side A and side B. It's actually greatly improved after 2 cycles through my Hummin' Guru, but there is zero surface noise throughout the music. Let's take a look at that mono label since we're looking at everything. So similarly to the stereo, at the very bottom of the label, you'll see guaranteed high fidelity in black. Later pressings, that is in white. Of course, the Columbia and the 2i, the Columbia boxes there on the left and right equator, always in white. And then the Columbia Records trademark, printed in the USA, that's in white as well at the very bottom. And again, I have a super clean, really nice pressing of the mono pressing. Let's talk about the cover art. This was the first of 3, and this is kind of like Mount Rushmore for Dylan fans. Bringing It All Back Home, Highway 61, and then Blonde on Blonde, the trifecta that came out between the years of 65, 66. This cover was actually shot in the living room of Dylan's manager's home in Bearsville, New York. Albert Grossman, of course, was his name, legendary manager. And the lady in the red dress is Sally Grossman, Albert's wife. Dylan spent 2 or 3 weeks in Grossman's house. Joan Baez visited him there in August of 1964. Most of this record, most of the songs were written then. Famously, there's a recollection from Joan Baez that Dylan would get up in the middle of the night, light a cigarette, go to the corner of the bedroom that they were staying in, where he had a typewriter, bottles of red wine, and he would compose what eventually comprised Bringing It All Back Home. Famously, this is when Dylan went electric, at least on one side. Side A is electric, side B is all acoustic, for the most part. Actually, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, final track on side 2, the acoustic side, there is a bit of electric guitar accompaniment that's really tastefully done. Bruce Langhorne was a guitar player on that track, accompanying Dylan, of course, Dylan on acoustic. So really cool. In doing a bit of research, I discovered that the Albert Grossman estate in Bearsville, New York, went on the market in May of this year for $5 million. It is now currently under contract. It was listed on a Sotheby's website. I'm going to show a couple photos of the listing photos. One of the living room, and very cool. They show this exact scene, and they have this record album on the mantle in the background there. Let's talk about the mono versus the stereo mix. Now, I think you really can't go wrong by having original mono pressings of the first 4 Dylan records. When we start with Bringing It All Back Home and Highway 61 and Blonde on Blonde and John Wesley Harding, although that's kind of an anomaly, I think the mono is better for John Wesley Harding. With this, side 2, the acoustic side, the stereo mix, I think, is better because it really separates Dylan's vocal, and with separation is more clarity, of course, and you really want that on the quieter side of the record. Now, side 1, of course, is the electric side. And for side 1, I actually prefer the mono pressing. This is a kind of a warmer sound. It is front and center. There seems to be a little more oomph, quite a bit more bottom end, and maybe just a little more drive, a little more urgency on the mono. And it's kind of the way, I don't want to wade into the artist's intent, but that is the way that perhaps the artist, they signed off on the mono mix, and that is the way they intended this to be represented and heard. Also, the mono mix was important for the radio stations. It provided just better slam, better push, better presentation than with a stereo mix at that point in time, especially on an AM radio band. So those are my thoughts on mono versus stereo. Now, it gets very complicated when we go up to Blonde on Blonde. There are a lot of different iterations and different mixes that were done on the stereo mix compared to the mono. But there are still people who swear by the Blonde on Blonde mono mix. Back to the stereo. Now, the interesting thing on Bringing It All Back Home is the final song, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, one of Dylan's prettiest compositions. And, he's accompanied by Bruce Langhorne on electric guitar in a lower register. At first you might think, is that a bass guitar in the background? But after each Dylan vocal verse, there is a kind of a cool electric guitar line, a cascading line in some points, and other points it's going up the scale, but really tastefully done, and much more clarity, much more separation, and just more audibly pleasing on the stereo mix. So another reason why it's kind of cool to have both. So in closing out today's video, I just want to reiterate that last Friday when I found this here in Fort Collins, Colorado at that national chain, wasn't expecting to find anything that day. I go back to this place about once a month because things like this invariably happen. I saw a copy of Buckingham Nixon there. It was quite beat up and I didn't touch it, but to find a nearly pristine copy of this in such great condition, and it's not, as far as price is concerned, they had this priced out at $9.95. And I immediately, when I was looking at the record, I knew right out of the gate that just seeing the black 360 stereo sound at the bottom of the label, that told me immediately, hey, this is an early pressing. And, I didn't bother to pull out my phone, but I was bringing this one home and I was going to do further research. I get home, I drop this stuff into Discogs, and lo and behold, there are only 3 for sale on Discogs, and the most recent one sold for $150 that was in worse condition than this one. So, not that, the Discogs value is the be-all or end-all, but it's a nice kind of exclamation point and gratifying. It helps quantify or rationalize the time that you may or may not spend seeking opportunities like this. So that's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. Again, it is still possible to find near mint examples of 60-year-old records out in the wild. Thanks again for watching. Hope to be back pretty soon with something new and different. Take care.